understand that our great nation, the United States of America, continues yet today? That's wonderful, because back in my day, we were having a little bit of difficulty on that very subject of being united. We were just the opposite, divided into two like this, or more like this, north and south. In fact, I had a little speech on that subject, which I should like to share with you. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war. Every so many years, as this great nation of ours grew in size and numbers, this issue of slavery would rise up and threaten to divide us. We'd have to come up with some sort of compromise, get along for a while. But then in the 1850s, everything just sort of escalated. 1854, Senator Stephen Douglas introduced and Congress passed the Kansas-Nebraska Act. It meant that instead of having slavery contained in one part of the country, with the hope and the expectation that one day we might be rid of slavery, slavery now be allowed to spread to new parts, into the west, into the north even. We might never be rid of slavery. And this began a whole series of events, which would take us pretty quickly through the rest of the 1850s up to 1860 and my election as president. But before we talk about all of that, I think I better take a little step back here and tell you about my own rather humble beginning. Now, do you suppose growing up there in Kentucky and Indiana on the frontier, I could go to school much? Hardly had schools back then on the frontier. Why, in the fall, that's harvest time. Everyone has to help on the farm at harvest time. No time for school. And in the spring, that's planting time. No school then either. We'd have school in the middle of winter for about 2 months. 2 months of school, all we ever had. And not every year either. Only when there happened to be a teacher around. More often than not, there wasn't a teacher. Got to be 21 years old. That means I can leave home. And just then my pa announced, well, son, we're moving again, heading west out to the prairie. You want to come along? And that's how I ended up moving to the state of Illinois, where I'd spend the rest of my days till I was elected president. Miss Mary Todd from Lexington, Kentucky. I discovered that Miss Todd was very intelligent. Well, pretty, of course. She even liked talking about politics. That was very unusual for a lady back then. And she was very particular about her politics. Why, do you know the great Stephen Douglas wanted to court Mary Todd? She had nothing to do with him. He's a Democrat. She was a Whig. Her father was a Whig politician back in Lexington. She knew the great Henry Clay herself. We need to get back to the story of the nation. We left off in 1854. We formed a new political party to fight the extension of slavery. The Republican Party. I said, if you elect me to be your president, I shall do nothing to interfere with slavery in those southern states where it already exists. I said that, of course, because I can't do anything about slavery there. The Constitution protects slavery. I, as president, have to obey the Constitution just like everyone else. However, I said, I will fight against the extension of slavery into the West. That I shall do. And because I said that, after I was elected that fall, 7 of the southern states, the Deep South, decided they didn't want me to be their president. Well, got down here to Washington, and on March the 4th, amid great tension, took the oath of office, right over there at the Capitol building. And I explained why I didn't think secession was the answer. I didn't believe it was constitutional. I didn't believe it was practical. And in the end, I appealed to the people. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. A few weeks later, we tried to send supplies down to Fort Sumter in South Carolina. Confederates fired on the fort. And just like that, we were enemies. The Civil War began. The fact that there are slaves in the South is helping the South in their rebellion. So I do have authority, not as president per se, but as commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy. I came up with a little proclamation. 4 long years, 4 terrible years, Over 600,000 soldiers dead from battle wounds, disease, starvation. Families divided. Families where one brother went to this side to fight, another brother went to that side to fight. Brothers fighting against brothers on opposite sides of a war. Now, by March 1865, it's pretty clear. This war is almost over. The North will be victorious. The Union will be preserved. The slaves will be freed. I suppose the people were expecting a victory speech. But I decided the nation needed to hear a different message. The Civil War is a punishment by God on this nation, both North and South, for the offense of slavery. Now, why would I say that? Well, I knew even as a boy growing up in Kentucky that I wouldn't want to be a slave. So I determined in my own heart never to make another person be my slave. Well, that goes against something we read in the scriptures. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Treat other people the same way we ourselves would wish to be treated. There's one more part to the Gettysburg Address. It looks to the future. Where do we go from here? So to end, I should like to read that to you. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here had thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. A new birth of freedom. That was my hope. Just as we as a nation had a birth of freedom back in 1776. Now, out of something so terrible as a civil war, we might have a new birth of freedom. But now give that freedom to more people, specifically to those who had been enslaved.